He had everything a man could want: power, money, and a wife who loved him without conditions. And in one single night, he threw it all away for a woman who was using him from the very beginning. What Adrian Viscari didn't know, what he refused to see, was that the quiet woman he walked out on that stormy Las Vegas night was worth more than every empire he had ever built or stolen. This is the story of a man who lost a queen because he was too blind to recognize her crown. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain came down hard over Las Vegas that Tuesday in November, the kind of rain that turned the Strip into a river of broken neon, and made the whole city feel like it was drowning in something it deserved. Water sheeted off the glass towers and pooled in the gutters along Flamingo Road, and the wind had teeth to it, sharp, mean, the kind that found the gaps in your collar and got inside. Adrian Viscari stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse suite on the 42nd floor of the Aldonas Tower and watched the storm like it was something personal. He had his jacket off, shirt untucked, a glass of scotch in his right hand that he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. His jaw was tight, the kind of tight that comes from years of holding something back, anger, or maybe just the exhaustion of pretending to be someone he no longer recognized in the mirror. He was 44 years old. He had built an organization that controlled 3 major city ports, 2 state legislators, and enough offshore accounts to make a small country nervous. Men feared him. Rivals negotiated around him when they could, and disappeared when they couldn't. He had come from nothing: a broken apartment in East Camden, a father who drank and gambled and eventually vanished, a mother who worked herself into an early grave stitching upholstery for furniture showrooms. He had dragged himself out of that wreckage with his bare hands and his willingness to do what other men flinched at, and yet standing at that window, watching the rain assault the city below him, Adrian Viscari felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not power, not even the dull comfort of a man who had earned his exhaustion. He felt trapped. He heard the bathroom door open behind him and caught her reflection in the window glass before he turned. Elena, his wife of 6 years. She had on a simple gray dress, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, and she was carrying 2 plates from the kitchen, something she had cooked herself, which she rarely did anymore, which told him she had something on her mind. She set them on the dining table and looked over at him without saying anything. She had dark eyes, patient and very still, the kind of eyes that saw more than they let on. He had noticed that about her when they first met, the way she watched a room, the way she listened before she spoke. He had mistaken it for shyness back then. "You're going to drink that or just hold it?" she said. "I'm thinking." "You've been thinking at that window for an hour." He turned away from the glass and set the scotch down on the bar cart. He didn't go to the table. "I'm not hungry." Elena stood there for a moment, hands at her sides. She was 38 years old, and she carried herself like someone who had learned a long time ago not to show what things cost her. There were small lines at the corners of her eyes now, faint ones, and Adrian noticed them in the way you notice things you haven't looked at carefully in a long time. "Sit down," she said. "Please, I need to talk to you about something." "Can it wait?" A pause, long enough that he felt it. "It's waited long enough already," she said quietly. Something in her voice made him look at her more directly. Not urgency exactly, more like a decision that had already been made. He recognized that quality in people. He had spent his career reading the moment when someone had crossed a line in their own head, when they had moved from considering to committed. He saw it in Elena now, and it made something shift uncomfortably in his chest. But his phone buzzed on the bar cart. He glanced down at the screen before he could stop himself. The name that appeared there was not his lieutenant. It was not his attorney. It was not anyone connected to business. Celeste. He felt the muscles across his shoulders loosen in a way they hadn't in hours, and he hated himself for it, even as it happened. "I have to take this," he said. "Adrian, 5 minutes." He picked up the phone, turned, and walked toward the study at the far end of the penthouse. He didn't look back at her. He didn't see the way Elena's expression shifted, not hurt exactly, because she was long past the kind of hurt that shows on the face. What crossed her face in that moment was something quieter and more permanent, the look of a woman who has just received the last piece of information she was waiting for. The study door clicked shut behind him. Celeste Quinn was 31 years old, and she had figured out by the age of 17 that the most valuable real estate in any room was the space beside a powerful man. She wasn't cruel about it, or rather, she had learned to be cruel in ways that didn't look like cruelty. She was funny and direct, and she laughed at the right moments, and she never asked for more than she had been given, which was the performance of someone who understood exactly how much she was taking. She had met Adrian 8 months ago at a fundraiser for a state senator whose campaign Adrian had quietly underwritten for the third consecutive cycle. She had been there as a +1 to someone whose name she no longer remembered, and she had caught Adrian watching her from across the room with the particular attention of a man who was not accustomed to wanting things he didn't already have. She had not made it easy for him. That was the first thing she had learned, the value of not making it easy. Now she was in a suite 3 floors below his, sitting on the edge of the bed in the low lamplight, her legs crossed, a glass of wine in her hand. When he answered, she smiled at the ceiling. "Are you coming?" she said. Something came up with Elena. It always does. A beat of silence. "That's not fair." "I'm not trying to be fair," Celeste said. "I'm trying to know if I should order room service for 1 or 2. She heard him exhale. That specific exhale, the one that meant he was already deciding. She had learned his sounds the way a musician learns an instrument. The exhale meant yes. The exhale meant he was already reaching for his jacket. "Give me 20 minutes, he said. She uncrossed her legs and set her wine down on the nightstand. "I'll be here." Elena heard the study door open and she heard Adrian's footsteps cross the living room. She was still standing at the dining table, both plates untouched, and she looked up as he came back in. He had his jacket on now. His phone was in his hand. "I have to go out," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "Tonight." "Business?" "It's 11 o'clock at night, Adrian, during a storm. The business doesn't care what time it is." He picked up his keys from the entry table. He didn't look at the plates she had set out. "Don't wait up." Elena's hands were still at her sides. Her breathing was very controlled. "What I needed to tell you," she said. "It's important. It can't—" "Tomorrow," he said. And he was already at the door. The door closed. The electronic lock clicked. The sound of it in that quiet penthouse was louder than it had any right to be. Elena stood there for 30 seconds without moving. The rain was loud against the windows. Somewhere outside, a car alarm had been set off by the wind, and it was cycling through its tones, mournful and insistent, and then it stopped too. She walked to the dining table and looked at the 2 plates she had prepared. She had made ossobuco from scratch that evening. His mother's recipe, the one she had spent 2 years learning to get right, the one she used only when something mattered. She stood there looking at it for a moment, and then she picked up both plates and carried them to the kitchen and scraped them into the trash without expression. She walked to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. She pressed one hand flat against her lower abdomen, a gesture so private she wouldn't have made it if anyone else had been in the room. She had been carrying the secret for 4 weeks. The appointment with the doctor had confirmed it 9 days ago. She had spent those 9 days choosing the right moment, the right words, building up to a conversation that she understood, in her deepest self, would change everything. Because Elena Vescari knew something that the rest of the world did not know. And the revelation she had been preparing to make that evening was not only about a child. It was about who she was, who she had always been, and what that meant for the future of both their lives. But Adrian was gone. Again. And she was sitting alone in a dark bedroom with her hand pressed against her abdomen and the rain coming down outside like the sky was trying to say something nobody wanted to hear. She reached for her phone. She had 1 missed call already, a number she recognized, one that sent a cold thread of attention up her spine. She stared at it for a long moment before she dialed back. It rang twice. "You didn't call me back immediately," the voice on the other end said. It was a man's voice, measured, low, the voice of someone who had learned long ago that volume was the tool of men who hadn't earned their authority yet. "That concerns me, Elena." "I was handling something," she said. "Was it handled?" A silence. "No." Another silence, longer, and she knew he was making a calculation on the other end. She had grown up listening to the sound of her father making calculations. Roman Vale did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "I've been patient," he said. "You asked me for time. I gave you time. My intelligence tells me Viscari has been in contact with the Moretti faction for the past 6 weeks. Do you understand what that means?" "I understand." "He is positioning to take our northern corridor. He thinks we're weak because I haven't made a public move in 18 months. A pause. He is about to learn that quiet is not the same as weak. Father, 24 hours, Elena. His voice was completely flat. You convince him to come to the table, or I will interpret his silence as a declaration. You know what comes after that. She did know. She had spent 3 years trying to prevent exactly that. 3 years living a life that was half constructed. A wife, a woman in the background, a person with no visible edge, while the reality of what she was and where she came from sat coiled inside her like something waiting for permission to exist. I'll reach him, she said. See that you do. The call ended. Elena sat in the dark for another moment. Then she stood. She went to the closet and moved aside the back panel on the left wall. A modification she had made herself 18 months ago, one that Adrian had never noticed or asked about. And she looked at what was there. Not weapons. Not money. Documentation. Organizational charts. A sealed letter addressed to Adrian with her real name on the return address. The name she had not used since the night she walked away from her father's world and tried to become someone simpler and safer. Elena Weil. Not Vescari. Not the quiet wife. Not the woman who cooked ossobuco from scratch and waited by windows. The only surviving heir to the Veil Syndicate, the oldest and most disciplined criminal organization in the northeastern United States. An empire that had existed for 60 years, that controlled financial networks. Adrian Vescari had spent the last decade trying to reach through political connections and violence, never knowing that the key to everything he wanted had been sleeping in his bed for 6 years. She closed the panel. She got her coat. She looked at herself in the mirror by the front door for exactly 2 seconds, and then she left. She had 24 hours. Her husband had a 3-floor head start, and the storm outside was getting worse. Celeste answered the door in a hotel robe, and Adrian had the brief, uncomfortable awareness that he had been moving toward this room like a man in a current. Not swimming exactly, just not resisting. He stepped inside and she handed him a glass without asking, and he took it and drank. You look terrible, she said, which was the kind of thing she said that he had decided to interpret as honesty rather than cruelty. Long day. Was she upset? He didn't answer immediately. He set his glass on the dresser and looked out the window at the rain-soaked city. From down here, the lights of the strip were diffused through the wet glass into something that looked almost soft. She wanted to talk, he said. She always wants to talk. Celeste, I'm just saying. She sat on the edge of the bed and tucked one leg under her. You've told me for 8 months that you're going to have a real conversation with her about where things stand, about what you both actually want. She tilted her head. Has that conversation happened? He was quiet. That's what I thought, she said. Not unkindly. That was the thing about Celeste, the quality that had hooked him when everything else in his life felt like it was moving at a frequency he couldn't quite calibrate. She was direct. She said the actual thing. He had forgotten how rare that was. What he did not know, what he had no way of knowing in that moment, standing at that rain-streaked window, was that Celeste Quinn's directness was a practiced instrument, that she had done her research on Adrian Vescari long before the fundraiser where they supposedly met by chance, that she had understood, with a clarity that she found professionally satisfying, that the way to Adrian was through the particular loneliness of a powerful man who had stopped being truly seen. And she had made herself into exactly what he needed to see. Stay, she said. Simple. Clean. No performance in it, or rather the performance was so complete that it had become invisible. And Adrian Vescari, who had built his entire life on reading people, on knowing when a room was wrong, on the survival instinct that had kept him alive in an industry that consumed men like him regularly, Adrian Vescari stayed. 3 floors above, Elena Vale was already on her phone, trying every number she had for her husband. The calls went to voicemail, every one of them. By midnight, 2 things were happening simultaneously in the Aldonis Tower that Adrian Vescari knew nothing about. In the penthouse, his most trusted lieutenant, a careful, methodical man named Garrett Fossey, who had worked for Adrian for 11 years and who had a habit of picking at the corner of his thumbnail when information made him nervous, was standing in the empty living room staring at a file he had just received from a source he trusted completely. The file contained a single photograph and 3 pages of documentation. He read the documentation twice. He looked at the photograph for a long time, Then he picked up his phone and called Adrian. No answer. He called again. No answer. Garrett Fossey set the file down on the bar cart next to the untouched Scotch glass and sat on the edge of the sofa with his elbows on his knees and his thumbnail working at the corner of his index finger. He had been in this business long enough to know that some information, once received, changed the weight of everything that came before it. He was holding that kind of information right now, and his boss was not answering his phone, and outside the rain was coming down like a judgment. 3 floors below, in a hotel corridor that smelled of carpet cleaner and recycled air, Elena was walking fast toward the elevator bank. She had tried Adrian's phone 4 more times. She had left 2 messages. Her voice on those messages was steady and low and utterly without panic, which was the voice of a woman who had learned that panic was a luxury she could not afford. Not now, and maybe not ever again. She pressed the elevator button. The display above the door showed the car descending from the 39th floor. She did not know what she would say when she found him. She had the sealed letter in the inside pocket of her coat, the letter that contained everything, the documents, the truth of who she was, the proof of the child they had made together. She had carried it for 9 days, waiting for the right moment. She was done waiting for the right moment. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. The doors closed behind her. Her reflection stared back at her from the brushed steel surface, composed, coat buttoned, dark eyes, very still. And for a moment she looked at that reflection the way you look at someone you used to know. The elevator began to descend. 3 floors below, behind a hotel room door with the privacy light on, Adrian Vescari was pouring himself another drink and laughing at something Celeste had said, and the sound of his laughter was easy in a way it almost never was anymore. And he was not thinking about his wife or the unanswered calls or the conversation she had tried to start earlier in the evening. He was not thinking about any of it. That was the night everything broke. Not with an explosion, not with sirens, just a man in a hotel room choosing not to answer his phone, and a woman in an elevator descending toward a hallway where the truth was going to find him whether he was ready for it or not. The elevator slowed. The doors opened on the 39th floor. Elena stepped out into the corridor. She turned toward room 3912, and she had taken exactly 4 steps when she stopped. The door to 3912 was not fully closed. Through the gap, she heard his voice, and then she heard her laugh. Elena Vale stood perfectly still in that corridor with the sealed letter pressed against her ribs, and the child she was carrying and the entire future of 2 criminal empires hanging in the air around her, and she did not move for a very long time. When she finally did move, it was not toward the door. She reached into her coat and held the letter in her hands. She looked at it. Then she put it back. She turned and walked back down the corridor toward the elevator. Her footsteps made no sound on the carpet. Her face was completely controlled, but her hand, the one pressed flat against the outside of her coat over the pocket where the letter was shaking in a way she had not let herself shake in years. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. And as the doors closed, her phone rang. The name on the screen was not Adrian. It was Garrett Fossey, and the first thing he said when she answered was, "Mrs. Vescari, I think we need to talk right now, because I just found out who you actually are." The elevator doors had not fully closed yet when Elena answered. She pressed the phone to her ear and kept her voice at the exact register she had trained herself to use when the ground was moving under her feet, low even, with no air in it that didn't need to be there. "How did you get this number, Garrett?" A pause on the other end. Not the pause of a man caught off guard. The pause of a man who had rehearsed this and was now discovering that the rehearsal had not been enough. "You're listed as emergency contact on 3 of Mr. Vescari's organizational documents," he said. "I've had this number for 4 years. I just never had a reason to use it." "And now you do." "Yes, ma'am. Now I do." The elevator reached the lobby and the doors opened onto the marble atrium. Elena did not step out. She pressed the button to hold the doors and stood there in the brushed steel box with the rain audible through the building's glass front and her heartbeat the only internal sound she was fully conscious of. "Say it," she said. Another pause, shorter this time. "The file came from a contact I trust inside the state attorney's office. Background sweep on Vescari Organization Associates. Standard counterintelligence, nothing we haven't seen before. But this one had an attachment that wasn't standard." She heard him exhale. "Photographs?" Documentation going back 11 years, and a name. Another beat. Your name. Your real name. Elena said nothing. Elena Vale, Garrett said, daughter of Roman Vale, sole heir to the Vale Syndicate. His voice had gone careful in the way voices go when a man is trying to hold something large and unstable. I've been with Adrian for 11 years and I had no idea. None of us did. Where are you right now? She said. Penthouse, his suite. Stay there, don't call him, don't contact anyone else. She released the door hold button and stepped out of the elevator into the lobby. I'll be up in 4 minutes. Mrs. Viscari? Elena, she said. That's the name. Use it. She ended the call and crossed the lobby. Her heels were quiet on the marble, and her coat was still buttoned, and her face was the face of a woman who had been trained since childhood to never let a room read her before she was ready to be read. The overnight concierge looked up, and she moved past him without slowing. She pressed the elevator button for 42. Garrett Fossey was exactly where he said he would be. Standing in the middle of the penthouse living room with his jacket on and his tie loosened and the file on the bar cart beside him. He was a big man, broad across the chest, with the kind of hands that had done rough work earlier in his life and still looked like it. His hair was going gray at the temples, and he was picking at the corner of his left thumb in the way Elena had noticed him do years ago when something had him rattled. He was rattled now. He looked at her when she came through the door, really looked the way a person looks when they are recalibrating everything they thought they knew about someone. And she saw the specific quality of that look, and she recognized it. She had been waiting for it for 3 years. She had dreaded it and prepared for it, and now that it was here, it felt neither as catastrophic nor as liberating as she had imagined. It just felt like what it was, the beginning of the next thing. Sit down, Garrett, she said. He didn't sit. He doesn't know. No. He's been going after the Vale Northern Corridor for 2 years. He had Moretti run interdiction on 3 of their shipments last spring. Garrett stopped, pressed his mouth together. He's been at war with your family, and he doesn't know he married into it. That's correct. How? Not a question exactly. A word he put out there because the alternative was silence, and silence wasn't enough. Elena took her coat off and laid it over the back of the sofa. She sat down in the chair across from him, the one by the window, the city still visible behind her through the rain-streaked glass, the neon of the strip bleeding colors down through the water. She sat straight, hands in her lap, and she looked at Garrett Fossey the way she had looked at a lot of men over the years who needed information delivered in a way they could absorb without falling apart. I left my father's organization 8 years ago, she said. I wanted out. He didn't accept it, but he respected it because I gave him no choice. I built a new identity, not fraudulent, legally clean, just private. I changed how I presented myself. When I met Adrian, I was 3 years removed. He did his background check. It came back clean because I had made certain it would. A pause. I fell in love with him. That part wasn't calculated. It wasn't part of anything. It just happened. Garrett was quiet. I spent the first 2 years of our marriage believing I could keep both worlds separate, she continued. By year 3, I understood that was not going to hold. My father's health declined. The organization needed structure at the top, and Adrian's operations started pushing against Vale territory in ways that were going to force a response. She looked at her hands. I have been trying to find the right moment to tell him the truth for 18 months. And tonight I was going to tell him everything. She looked up. All of it. The identity, the syndicate, the child. The word landed in the room and Garrett went very still. You're pregnant, he said. Yes. He sat down then. He sat down heavily on the sofa and put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor. She watched him process it, watched the information move through him in stages, the professional calculation and then the human part underneath it, the part that had worked beside Adrian Viscari for 11 years and understood what this meant for a man who had never had a family of his own that stayed intact. He's downstairs, Garrett said. With her. I know. You saw. I heard enough. Garrett rubbed his face with both hands. A rough, unpolished gesture, the kind men make when they've run out of the performance of composure. How long has that been going on? 8 months, approximately. He looked at her. You knew. I suspected. Then I knew. There's a period between those two things that takes longer than it should. She said it without bitterness. Just the fact of it, flat and accurate. I chose to focus on the larger problem. Garrett stood up again. He couldn't sit still. She could see that, the energy moving through him with nowhere useful to go. He walked to the window and stood where Adrian had been standing hours ago, looking out at the same rain-ruined city. Roman Vale gave you a deadline, he said. It wasn't a guess. 24 hours from approximately 10:30 tonight. And if Adrian doesn't come to the table, then Roman interprets the silence as a declaration and responds accordingly. She let that sit for a moment. You understand what his response would look like. I understand what a man like Roman Vale's response looks like, yes. Garrett turned from the window. His face had gone through something in the last 30 seconds, and what was left was not fear exactly, but close. The kind of alertness that fear produces in men who are good at their jobs. We're not equipped for that engagement, Elena. Our strength is financial, political. We don't have the infrastructure for a territorial war with an organization that's been running 60 years. Adrian doesn't know that because he's been treating Vale like a competitor instead of a dynasty, she said. Yes, I know. So what do we do? She looked at him for a moment. That question, the we of it, registered somewhere behind her eyes without changing her expression. Right now, she said, you do nothing. You do not go downstairs and pull him out of that room because that conversation in that condition will go badly, and we don't have room for badly right now. She stood up. I'm going to make contact with my father's people and buy as much time as I can. In the morning, when Adrian comes back, I will tell him everything, all of it, in the right order, with documentation, so that he can't dismiss it or minimize it. She picked up her coat. I need you to not be the one who tells him first. Can you do that? Garrett looked at her for a long time. 11 years of working for Adrian Viscari had made him very good at reading people, and what he read in Elena Vale right now was something he had not encountered many times in this business. Not manipulation, not performance, just a person who had been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and had organized themselves so thoroughly around the weight of it that they no longer remembered what it felt like to put it down. Yeah, he said, I can do that. Thank you, Garrett. She left. He stood in the empty penthouse and listened to the rain. Celeste Quinn was not asleep. She was lying on her side in the low light of room 3912 with her eyes open and Adrian's breathing slow and heavy beside her, and she was thinking. This was something she did when she was alone or near alone. The actual thinking, the real calculation that lived under the performance. She was good at the performance. She had been good at it for a long time. But the thinking was where she lived. She had been contacted 7 weeks ago by a man named Harlan Mote, who worked in some undefined capacity for the Moretti faction's intelligence arm. He had sat across from her in a coffee shop in Henderson and told her things about Adrian Viscari that she had already known, and then he had told her things she hadn't, and then he had told her what he wanted. What he wanted was information, Adrian's schedule, his moods, the pressure points, the moments when his judgment went soft. What he offered in return was financial and very specific. Celeste had not agreed immediately. That was not how she operated. She had asked for 72 hours, gone home, and thought about it carefully and practically, the way she thought about all decisions that had significant downside risk. She had identified 3 scenarios, one where she refused, one where she complied, and it worked, one where she complied, and it went wrong. She had assigned probabilities. She had made her choice. She was not cruel about it. She genuinely did not find Adrian Viscari unpleasant. He was smart, he was controlled in public and less controlled in private, and he had a quality of attention when he was focused on you that felt, in the moment, like being the only person in the world. She understood why his wife had married him. She understood why his wife was still trying to hold on. What she had not anticipated, and this was the thing that was keeping her awake in the low light, with her eyes open and the rain hitting the window, was Elena. She had received a secondary file 3 days ago from Harlan Mote, a supplemental package, he had called it. Information that changed the context of the assignment. She had read it and read it again, and then she had sat very still for a long time because what the file told her was that Adrian Viscari's quiet, unremarkable wife was not who she appeared to be, and that the situation Celeste had inserted herself into was significantly more complex and significantly more dangerous than she had been told when she agreed to the arrangement. She had called Mote and told him she needed to renegotiate. He had laughed, not unkindly. That was the thing about Harlan Mote. His specific brand of menace came wrapped in something that felt almost like warmth. He had told her the terms were set. He had told her she was already in. He had told her that people who changed their minds at this stage of an operation had a tendency to become liabilities, and that he had no use for liabilities. The call had ended, and Celeste had poured herself a drink and sat with it until it went warm. Now she was lying in the dark next to Adrian Viscari, listening to him sleep. And she was calculating something she hadn't calculated yet. The possibility that she had made a serious error, not a moral error. Celeste had made her peace with her moral ledger a long time ago. A practical error. The kind that had consequences she had not fully mapped. Because if Elena Vale was who the file said she was, then this wasn't a domestic triangle. This was an operational fault line running directly under a war that was about to start, and Celeste Quinn was standing on the wrong side of it. She closed her eyes. She needed to sleep. She needed to think clearly in the morning. She needed options, and she couldn't build options in the dark. But sleep did not come. Because what she kept returning to, what her mind kept circling back to with an insistence that felt almost like a warning, was a single detail from the supplemental file. One line in the intelligence summary that she had read 3 times and then tried to file away. Subject is believed to be in the early stages of pregnancy. Celeste lay very still in the dark and thought about that line and what it meant for the architecture of everything she had built over the last 8 months. And outside, the rain came down without stopping. At 2:15 in the morning, in a secure communications room inside a brownstone on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, Roman Vale was on a call. He was 71 years old, and he looked like a man 10 years younger. And he had the posture of someone who had decided at some point in his youth that he would not allow age to take things from him that he had not given permission to take. His hair was silver and close cut. His hands were still steady. He was seated at a table with a single lamp and a phone and a glass of water, and the person on the other end of the call was not his daughter. "She made contact," the voice said. "She's still in Las Vegas. And Viscari. Not with her." Roman Vale was quiet for a moment. He moved his water glass a quarter inch to the left and looked at it. "She asked for more time," the voice said. "She believes she can reach him by morning." "She has always believed she could reach him," Roman said. "That belief has cost us 18 months. Your call." "Yes." He moved the water glass back. "It is." He thought for a moment. Actually thought, which was something people who observed him at a distance sometimes mistook for hesitation. It was not hesitation. It was Roman Vale's equivalent of loading a weapon. "Keep our people in position. If she reaches him and he responds appropriately, we stand down. If we do not receive confirmation by 8 a.m. Pacific, we begin." "Understood." "And the Moretti involvement?" A pause. "Confirmed and deepening. They have an asset close to Viscari. We don't know who yet." Roman looked at the lamp, a long, flat look. "Find out." The call ended. He sat in the quiet room for a while. The Upper East Side outside was wet and hushed at this hour, the sounds of the city muted by the late hour and the rain that had pushed up the coast from Nevada, which was a meteorological coincidence and nothing more. He thought about his daughter. He thought about the child she was carrying, which his intelligence had confirmed 5 days ago, and which he had not acknowledged to her on their call because that information was his, and he would use it the way he used all information, carefully, at the right moment, for the right purpose. He thought about Adrian Viscari sleeping somewhere in Las Vegas, unaware that the ground beneath his organization had been compromised from multiple directions, unaware that the woman he had married and neglected and left alone tonight was the single piece that held the entire collapsing structure together. Roman Vale had not built a 60-year empire by being sentimental, but he had built it by being accurate. And the most accurate read he had on this situation, the one he turned over in his mind as he sat alone in the lamplit room, was this: his daughter loved that man. She had chosen him without calculation. She had protected him without being asked. She had carried his child and his secrets and his careless absence with a patience that was almost painful to observe from a distance. And Adrian Viscari was currently not answering her calls. Roman reached for his water glass, took a single measured sip, set it back down. If the man could not recognize what was standing in front of him, then there was nothing left to negotiate. There was only what came after. And Roman Vale was very, very good at what came after. At 3:40 a.m., Elena's phone rang again. She was in the hotel business center on the second floor, the only place in the building she could use a secure line without going back to the penthouse. And she had been there for over an hour, working through encrypted channels, buying time with people who did not particularly want to sell it. She looked at the screen. Not Garrett, not her father. A number she did not recognize, but with a prefix that she did recognize. A routing prefix used by exactly one organization she knew of. She answered. "You should know," the voice said, a woman's voice, even and careful, that the asset inside Viscari's organization is not Garrett Fossey. Elena went still. "The asset is closer than that," the voice said. "And she's been feeding your location and your husband's schedule to the Moretti faction for 8 weeks. The line went dead. Elena sat with the phone in her hand in the empty business center at 3:40 in the morning, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and she put together what she had just been told with what she already knew, and the shape it made was not complicated. She had known Adrian was involved with Celeste Quinn for 8 months. She had known it and absorbed it and made the strategic choice to hold her position. What she had not known, what had just become violently clear, was that Celeste Quinn was not just an affair. She was an operation, which meant everything Adrian had said to her, every private frustration, every schedule, every moment of domestic vulnerability, had been collected and passed to people who wanted the Viscari operation weakened and would use Elena's own husband's words to do it. And Moretti working against Viscari with inside information, while Roman Vale prepared to open a front from the north. It wasn't 2 separate threats. It was a coordinated pincer. And the pin at the center of it, the thing holding the trap open, was a woman asleep 3 floors above her in Adrian Viscari's arms. Elena stood up. She put her phone in her coat pocket. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button and waited with her hands very still at her sides, and her breathing measured and her mind running at a speed that the expression on her face gave absolutely no evidence of. The elevator came. She stepped in. She pressed 39. She was not going there to fight. She was not going there to confront or collapse or demand. She was going there because the timeline had just collapsed, and the conversation she had planned to have in the morning with documentation and careful sequencing had just been overtaken by a reality that did not care about her sequencing. She needed to get to Adrian before the morning, before Moretti moved, before her father's deadline ran out. She needed to get to him now, and she needed him to listen, and she needed him to believe her. And the specific horror of this moment, the thing that made her press her hand flat against the elevator wall to steady herself as the car rose, was that she did not know if he would. She did not know if 6 years of marriage and the truth of who she was and the child they had made together would be enough to reach a man who had just spent the night choosing someone else. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. The corridor of the 39th floor stretched out in front of her, empty and quiet, the carpet the color of dried blood under the low overhead lights. She stepped out. She walked to room 3912. She raised her hand to knock, and before her knuckles touched the door, it opened from the inside. And Celeste Quinn was standing there in the hotel robe with her hair loose, holding her phone, and her eyes when she saw Elena were not surprised. They were calculating. And in that single unguarded half-second before Celeste arranged her expression into something more neutral, Elena saw it. The flicker of professional assessment, the rapid internal adjustment of a person who had been caught not at something personal, but at something operational. It was not the face of a woman who had stolen someone's husband. It was the face of a woman who had just realized her cover was blown. Behind Celeste, across the dim room, Adrian was sitting up in bed with the lamp on, and his face when he saw Elena in the doorway went through something complicated and fast. Guilt, defensiveness, and then underneath both of those, something that looked almost like fear. Not of Elena. Of what Elena's presence in that doorway meant, though he could not yet have said exactly what that was. "Elena," he said, her name in his mouth like something he was trying to catch before it fell. She looked at him. She looked at Celeste. She looked at the phone in Celeste's hand. "Step away from her," Elena said. Her voice was completely level. She was not speaking to Adrian. She was speaking to Celeste. And the woman in the doorway who Adrian Viscari had spent 8 months dismissing as an obstacle to his happiness took one step forward into the light of the corridor, and something in her bearing changed. A shift so complete and so final that even Adrian, who was still processing the basic fact of his wife standing outside the door of the room where he had spent the night, felt it in the air like a change in pressure before a storm makes landfall. "We need to talk," Elena said. "All three of us. Right now. And after that, two of us are going to have a very different conversation." Her eyes moved to Adrian, held, "And you are going to listen to every word." Nobody moved for 3 full seconds. That was how long it took the air in the corridor of the 39th floor to settle into something that felt less like a hallway in a hotel and more like the inside of a room where a decision had just been made that could not be walked back. 3 seconds of Adrian sitting up in a hotel bed with his shirt off and his face doing something complicated and unresolved. Celeste standing in the doorway with her phone in her hand and her robe pulled closed and her eyes doing the rapid private calculation of a person reassessing their position under fire. And Elena standing in the corridor with her coat still on and her hands at her sides in the particular stillness of someone who has decided that stillness is the only weapon that cannot be taken from them. Then Celeste stepped back. Not dramatically. Just one measured step to the left, clearing the doorway, her face settling into something that was not quite neutral, but was professional enough to pass for it in bad light. Elena walked into the room. She did not look at the bed. She did not look at the clothes on the floor, or the 2 glasses on the nightstand, or any of the other inventory of a night she had already understood in full before she knocked. She walked to the chair by the window, the one furthest from the bed, and she sat down in it and crossed one leg over the other and looked at Celeste Quinn for the first time with nothing between them and no intermediary and no performance required from either side. Celeste met her eyes. She was good. Elena would give her that. The calculation was still moving behind her face, but the surface was composed. The posture was controlled. The phone had been lowered to her side in a gesture that looked casual and was not. "Put the phone on the table," Elena said. "Excuse me." "The table." Elena's voice did not change in pitch or temperature. "Face down. Now." Adrian said, "Elena, what the hell is—" "Not yet," Elena said, still looking at Celeste. "Her first." Something moved across Celeste's face. Not fear exactly. The cousin of fear that visits people who are very good at managing risk when they realize the risk has been managed by someone else. She set the phone on the table beside the television. "Face down." "Sit down," Elena said. Celeste sat on the end of the bed. Adrian shifted away from her automatically, a reflex he was probably not aware of, and the distance he put between them in that movement told Elena something she filed without expression. Adrian was already feeling it. The shift. The wrongness. He didn't know what he was feeling yet, but his body knew before his mind did, the way bodies do when the story they've been living inside suddenly reveals its actual genre. "Someone needs to tell me what is going on," he said. His voice had the specific edge of a man who is used to being the person who defines what is happening in a room. The edge was slightly desperate underneath, and he was not quite controlling it. Elena looked at him then, directly. For a long moment that had weight to it. "I'll tell you what's going on," she said, "but I need you to do one thing first, and it's the only thing I'm going to ask you to do tonight, and if you can't do it, then nothing else I say matters." She held his eyes. "I need you to be quiet and listen, not to respond, not to defend yourself, just listen." "Elena." "That was not quiet," she said. The room went still. Adrian's jaw tightened. He was a man who had not been spoken to that way in 20 years, and she could see the instinct to push back move through him like a current through wire, and she watched it, and she did not move. And after a moment, he put it down. Not gracefully, but he put it down. "The woman beside you," Elena said, "has been feeding your schedule, your operational decisions, and your private communications to Harlan Moat, who works intelligence for the Moretti faction, for approximately 8 weeks. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one before it. Adrian looked at Celeste. The look was not the look of a betrayed lover. It happened too fast for that, moved through hurt into something colder and more focused within the span of 2 seconds. Because whatever else Adrian Vescari was, he was a professional, and professionals in his industry have a very specific and very dangerous response to the word Moretti. Celeste said nothing, which was, Elena knew, the smart response. Denial would have been worse. She was running options. Elena could see it. The phone was on the table face down and she could not get to it, and there were two people in the room who knew what she was, and she was calculating the geometry of the situation with the focused attention of someone who is trained for exactly this. "Is that true?" Adrian said. He was looking at Celeste and his voice was very quiet now. Celeste looked at him. Something moved across her face. Genuine this time, or as close to genuine as a person in her position could produce. "It's complicated. That's not a no." "Adrian, that is not a no." His voice had dropped further. The quieter Adrian Viscari got, in Elena's experience, the more dangerous the specific quality of his attention became. She had seen it in business negotiations. She had seen it twice in confrontations that had not ended well for the other party. She had never been the one directing it, and she understood now in a full-body way why people who found themselves in its path tended to become very still. Celeste was very still. "Moretti has been making moves on your northern distribution for 14 weeks, Elena said. She said it evenly, because this information needed to land in Adrian's mind as operational fact before it landed as emotional betrayal. The sequence mattered. 3 interdiction events, 2 of which you attributed to federal surveillance and 1 of which you blamed on a customs contact who was subsequently removed from his position." She paused. "The customs contact was not the problem." Adrian's eyes moved to Elena. The recalibration happening behind them was almost visible. A man rapidly recontextualizing 14 weeks of operational decisions against new information and finding that the picture that resulted was worse than any version he had previously considered. "How do you know this?" he said. "I know it," Elena said, "because I have access to intelligence that you don't have access to. I know it because I have been watching this situation develop for longer than you're aware of. And I know it because the Moretti faction is not the only organization that has been paying attention to your operation, Adrian." She uncrossed her legs and leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees. "That's what I came to tell you tonight. That's what I've been trying to tell you for 6 weeks. That's what you went downstairs to avoid." The words were not accusatory. They were precise. But the precision was its own kind of blade, and she saw it cut, and she did not look away from it. "What organization?" he said. And here was the moment. The one she had rehearsed in 11 different versions over 18 months. The one she had approached and retreated from and circled back around until the approaching and retreating had become a kind of permanent condition. The moment that everything before it had been leading to and that everything after it would be shaped by. She held it for exactly the right amount of time. Not dramatic, just enough for him to understand that what she was about to say had weight. "The Veil Syndicate," she said, "my father's organization, which I am the sole heir to, and which has been watching your operation for the last 2 years because your operation has been moving against its territory." The room was completely silent. Adrian looked at her. She watched his face, and what happened on it was not a simple thing. It moved through disbelief. Genuine structural disbelief, the kind that comes not from doubting a person, but from doubting the coherence of your own understanding of reality. And then through something that was almost recognition, a retroactive rereading of 6 years of small moments and observations that had not registered at the time, and then into something harder and less readable. "Your name is Veil," he said. Very flat. The voice of a man feeling his way across ground he can no longer trust. "Elena Veil." "Yes." "Roman Veil is your father." "Yes." "The Roman Veil." "There's only one." He stood up from the bed. He was in his undershirt and his slacks from the evening before, and he moved to the window the way he always moved when he needed to think, toward glass, toward the view of the city, as if looking at the world from height gave him access to a perspective that the room level denied him. He stood there with his back to her and his hands at his sides, and the rain was still going outside, lighter now but still present, and the neon of the strip was starting to be competed with by the first gray suggestion of pre-dawn on the eastern edge of the sky. 6 years, he said to the window. "Yes. You've known. The whole time. Who I was, what I was building, what I was moving against. I left my father's organization before I met you," she said. "I walked away from it. That was real. What I felt for you was real. I'm not going to stand here and apologize for loving you, but yes. I knew. And I chose not to tell you because I was trying to protect both of us and both operations from a collision that I believed could be prevented. By lying. By waiting for the right time. That's the same thing. It is not the same thing, Adrian. And now there was something in her voice that had not been there before, Mud. Not anger, but the end of a particular kind of patience. The kind that has been extended for so long it has become structural. And when it finally shifts, the shift is absolute. Lying is what she was doing. A gesture toward Celeste, minimal and precise. What I was doing was trying to keep you alive long enough to hear the truth. Adrian turned from the window. His face had gone through the phases, and what was left was something she recognized from the early years, before success had layered things over it. The face of a man from East Camden who had learned very young that the world was full of traps and that he was the only instrument he had for detecting them. Roman gave you a deadline, he said. 24 hours. Started at 10:30 last night. He looked at the gray light beginning outside. Doing the math. That's approximately 13 hours from now, he said. Yes. And if I don't come to the table? He moves. And Adrian, she held his eyes. You are not positioned to absorb what he moves with. Your northern infrastructure is already compromised. Moretti has been softening your distribution for 3 months. You have 2 legislators who are going to distance themselves the moment there's public instability. You don't have the depth for a 2-front engagement against organizations that have been running for decades. She said it without cruelty, which somehow made it worse. I'm not telling you this to humiliate you. I'm telling you because you need to know the actual dimensions of what you're standing in. The room was very quiet. Outside, the rain ticked against the glass in irregular rhythms. Somewhere down the corridor, a door opened and closed. Then Celeste moved. It was a small movement, her hand toward the phone on the table, and she might have been reaching for it out of habit or nervousness or something she had not thought through, but Adrian moved faster than she did, and his hand came down on the phone before hers reached it, and the look he gave her when he did it was the kind of look that removed all ambiguity about where things stood. Don't, he said. Celeste pulled her hand back. She sat very still. She was reassessing her options and finding them limited, and Elena could see the specific quality of that process in the controlled rhythm of her breathing and the set of her shoulders. Who is Harlan Moat to you? Adrian said. Not to Elena. To Celeste. Celeste looked at him. She was deciding something. Elena could see it, the calculation of how much truth bought the most safety in this specific configuration. She was good. Even now, cornered, she was running the angles. A contractor, Celeste said. I was approached. I was offered a fee. I was told it was information gathering. Nothing physical, nothing that would... Nothing that would what? Adrian said. Nothing that would get anyone killed? Is that the line? He set the phone down on the table and moved away from her, and the movement was controlled in a way that suggested the control was effortful. Do you understand how many people work for me? Do you understand that when Moretti compromises my distribution routes, there are men who... He stopped. He pressed his mouth shut. He was managing something, and Elena watched him manage it. How much do they know? I reported your schedule, Celeste said. Movement patterns. Some of what you said about the northern expansion. A pause. The meeting with Alderman Prescott last month. Adrian went very still. That meeting was off the books. I know. 3 people knew about that meeting. Me, Garrett, and my attorney. And me, Celeste said quietly. You told me the night before you were... She stopped. I was what? You were venting. About the pressure. You weren't thinking about what you were saying. She said it without apparent judgment, which was almost worse. You didn't think I was listening. The silence that followed had a specific texture. Elena recognized it. She had felt it before. Not in her own life, but in rooms where she had watched powerful men understand for the first time the full cost of the private version of themselves they had allowed to exist. Adrian turned away. He walked to the window again. This time he stood there with one hand on the glass and his head slightly bowed, and the gray pre-dawn light was coming up properly now, the sky going from black to the color of old pewter, and Las Vegas from this height was beginning to look like what it actually was. A constructed thing, elaborate and lit and completely dependent on an infrastructure that most of the people inside it never thought about. Elena watched him, and she felt something that she had not expected to feel in this room at this hour after this particular night. She felt something close to sorrow. Not for herself. For him. for the specific way that very capable men sometimes built their entire architecture of self on a foundation they had never properly examined, and stood with their hand on a glass window watching a city come into its gray morning, understanding for the first time that the foundation was wrong. She had loved this man. She still loved him in the way that love persists after it has changed form. Not as the feeling she'd started with, but as the record of having felt it, which has its own weight and its own specific kind of grief. "The Prescott meeting," he said to the window. "If Moretti has that—"
"Then they know about the Hargrove contracts," Elena said. "And if they know about Hargrove, they have the leverage to collapse your relationship with the Port Authority within 72 hours.
He turned around. He looked at her, and the look was different now. The defensive architecture was down. Not because he had chosen to dismantle it, but because circumstances had dismantled it for him, and what was underneath was not weakness, but something rawer than the composed and dangerous man he had been presenting to the world for 20 years. "You knew this was coming," he said. "All of it." "I knew the shape of it, not every detail." "And your father?" "My father wants a negotiated arrangement. He has always wanted that. He is not a man who goes to war for pleasure. He goes to war when he calculates that the cost of not going to war exceeds the cost of going." She held his eyes. "Right now that calculation is very close. I have been the argument on the other side of that calculation for 18 months, Adrian. Me. My belief that you and I could bring these two organizations into alignment without bloodshed. My father has been patient because I asked him to be patient. But I am out of time, and so are you, and so is everyone whose life depends on this not becoming a war." Something in his face shifted, a realignment that was slow and comprehensive, like watching a building settle after its foundation has moved. "You came here tonight to offer me a deal," he said. "I came here tonight to tell you the truth. The deal was always available. It has been available for 18 months. The deal is that two organizations that have been competing in the same territory stop competing and become one operation, legally restructured, publicly untouchable, with shared governance." She paused. "The deal is that your children inherit something that doesn't have to be defended with bodies." The word children landed differently than she had intended it to, or perhaps exactly as she had intended it to. She no longer entirely knew. She watched it land. She watched him receive it and process it, and then his eyes changed and she understood that he had arrived at the question. "Elena," he said. She looked at him. "Are you—" "Yes," she said. No prelude, no setup, just the word clean and irreversible. 4 weeks. I was going to tell you tonight. That was the dinner. That was why I cooked." She said the last part quietly and without drama, and it was somehow the most devastating thing she had said in the entire conversation, more devastating than the intelligence reports or the syndicate or the deadline, because it was small and domestic and it contained the whole shadow of what the evening could have been. Adrian sat down. He sat down on the edge of the chair by the window, and he put his elbows on his knees and he pressed his hands over his face, and he stayed that way. Celeste stood up from the bed, quietly, carefully. "Sit down," Elena said without looking at her. Celeste sat back down. The room was quiet for a long time. The gray light outside was becoming something closer to the color of morning. Las Vegas was beginning its slow, reluctant transition from a city of night into a city of early workers and delivery trucks, and the particular exhausted pragmatism of a place that never fully sleeps. Adrian took his hands from his face. He looked at Elena, and the look was the most unguarded she had seen from him in 4 years. Stripped of the professional armor and the territorial reflex and the specific dignity of a man who had made himself from nothing and never fully forgiven himself for where he'd started. "I have been an idiot," he said. "Yes." "I should have listened." "Yes." "Elena, I'm not finished." Her voice was level, but it had changed. The composed patience was still there, but underneath it now was something solid and certain that had not been present before, or perhaps had always been present and was only now visible because everything else had been removed. "What you're feeling right now, the regret, the understanding of what you've missed, I believe it's real. I'm not questioning your feelings." She held his eyes. "But feelings are not the same as choices. And the choice in front of you right now is not about us. It's about 14,000 people who work across both organizations. It's about port workers and distributors and attorneys and every person downstream of a war that will be brutal and brief and will leave your side of it in pieces. She stood up. That is the choice, not whether you're sorry, whether you're willing to do what comes after sorry. He looked at her. He nodded, once, and the nod was the most honest thing she had seen him do in years. She picked up her coat. I need to make a call, she said. And then you need to get dressed, because in approximately 11 hours my father's patience ends, and I need you sitting across a table from him before that happens. She buttoned the top button of her coat. Garrett is upstairs. He'll help you understand the documentation. She turned to go. Elena. She stopped, but she didn't turn around. I'm sorry, he said. I know it's not enough. I know that. But I need to say it. She stood with her back to him for a moment. She was thinking about the ossobuco in the trash. She was thinking about 9 days of waiting for the right moment. She was thinking about the child she was carrying who was already, even at 4 weeks, requiring something of her that she had not fully accounted for, a fierceness that was separate from strategy, separate from syndicate politics, entirely and uncomplicatedly personal. Get dressed, Adrian, she said, and she walked out of the room into the corridor and the door closed behind her, and she stood in the hallway alone for 30 seconds with her eyes closed and her hand flat against the wall, and she breathed, and she let herself feel it, all of it, the grief and the anger and the strange, terrible tenderness of loving someone you are no longer certain you can save. And she felt it completely because she had learned a long time ago that things you don't let yourself feel tend to choose their own moments to surface. Then she opened her eyes and she straightened and she took out her phone and she called her father. He answered on the first ring. Of course he did. It's done, she said. He's coming to the table. A pause. You're certain? I am. Another pause. Roman Vale's pauses were never empty. They were always doing something. And the other matter, the Moretti asset inside his organization. Contained, Elena said. The woman. Elena looked at the closed door of room 3912. She's not going anywhere. Good. A beat. Elena. Yes. You're all right? It was not a question, and it was not quite a statement. It was the specific thing her father said when he meant something he did not have the vocabulary to say directly, which was the closest Roman Vale had ever come to asking how she was. She had learned to receive it as what it was, and not what it wasn't. I'm all right, she said. She ended the call. She was walking toward the elevator when her phone buzzed with a message from a number she did not recognize. She stopped. She opened it. 4 words and an attachment. Check the Garrett file. She stood in the corridor and opened the attachment. It was a photograph. 2 people. A restaurant she recognized from the financial district in Manhattan. A lunch meeting from the timestamp 11 days ago. One of the people in the photograph was Harlan Mote. The other was Garrett Fossey. Elena stood in the corridor of the 39th floor of the Aldonis Tower in Las Vegas at 5:17 in the morning, 11 hours before her father's deadline, with her husband putting on his shoes 3 doors behind her and a mole she had trusted with the most sensitive information of the past 12 hours. Eating lunch with a Moretti intelligence officer 11 days before any of this began, and she understood with a cold and total clarity that she had told Garrett Fossey everything. The schedule, the documentation, the plan to bring Adrian to the table. And Garrett Fossey had known who she was before he called her. He had known who she was because someone had told him, and that someone had received the information from Harlan Mote, and the photograph in her hand was proof that the chain ran the other way from what she had assumed, that Garrett was not a man who had stumbled onto a secret. He was a man who had been given one, which meant the file that had arrived in the penthouse, the intelligence sweep from the state attorney's office. The photograph and the documentation with her real name attached. It had not arrived by accident. Someone had sent it to Garrett Foss deliberately tonight, at precisely the moment that would cause the maximum disruption to a negotiation that was 11 hours from either succeeding or igniting a war. Someone wanted this conversation to happen in the worst possible way, at the worst possible time in the worst possible room. Elena turned around slowly. She looked at the closed door of room 3912. She looked at the elevator at the end of the corridor. She looked at the ceiling as if the building itself might offer some indication of the geometry she was now standing inside. Then her phone rang again. Not a number. No ID, just a call coming in on a line that was supposed to be secure. She answered it. She said nothing. The voice on the other end said, "Miss Vale, my name is Harlan Moat. I think it's time we spoke directly, don't you? Because the situation you think you're managing is not the situation you're actually in, and the man you just convinced to come to your father's table, a pause, deliberate, architectural, is the same man who authorized the operation that put your mother in the ground 12 years ago." She did not hang up. That was the first decision, made in the half-second after the words landed. And they landed like something physical, like a fist against the sternum, the specific impact of information that restructures everything it touches. She did not hang up. She did not speak. She stood in the corridor of the 39th floor, with the phone pressed against her ear, and she let the silence run because silence was information too. And right now she needed every piece of information available to her before she moved a single muscle in any direction. Harlan Moat let the silence run with her, patient, comfortable with it, in the way of a man who had spent a career using quiet as pressure. Elena breathed. Once, deliberately, the way her father had taught her when she was 14 years old, and she had come to him shaking after a confrontation with a rival family's son at a school event, and he had sat across from her and said, not unkindly, in the measured way he said everything, "The breath is the only thing you will always have access to. Use it before you use anything else." She used it. Then she said, "Prove it." Moat made a sound that was not quite a laugh, more the sound of appreciation for a specific quality of response. Direct. "I expected that." "I'm not interested in what you expected. Prove what you said or this call ends." "Check your email. The secure account, the one registered under the name Marlowe, which I shouldn't know about but do, which should tell you something about the quality of my access." A pause. "I'll wait." She pulled the phone from her ear and opened her email with her other hand, navigating to the account he had named. An account she had created 14 months ago using a routing protocol she had built herself. 3 people in the world knew it existed. She was one of them. Her father's head of security was another. The third was supposed to be no one. There was an email, no subject line, sent 4 minutes ago from an address that was a string of randomized characters. She opened it. An attachment. She opened the attachment. It was a file, an old one. The formatting was the kind used by organizational record-keeping systems that hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. She scrolled through it. Her eyes moved fast, trained to extract signal from documentation quickly, a skill she had developed young. She read dates. She read names. She read an operational summary that was 8 pages long and that described in the flat bureaucratic language of people who wrote about terrible things for professional purposes the details of an interdiction event that had taken place 12 years ago in a warehouse district outside Providence, Rhode Island. Her mother's name was in the 4th paragraph. Catherine Vale, née Hargrove. Collateral casualty. Confirmed. Elena stopped scrolling. She stood in the corridor and she looked at the name and the word beside it. And she felt something move through her that was not grief. Grief she had done 12 years ago. Grief she had processed and filed and learned to carry in the specific way you carry things that don't get smaller, but that you get stronger around. This was not that. This was something colder and more structural. The feeling of a load-bearing wall being removed from a building you thought you understood. Her mother had died in a warehouse fire. That was the story. Accidental. An investigation that had gone nowhere. Because investigations in that world had a tendency to go nowhere when the people with the answers had reasons to keep them there. She had never questioned it, not because she was incurious, because Roman Vale had grieved it, quietly, in the contained way he did everything, but genuinely, she had always believed genuinely, and she had never imagined that the grief was complicated by knowledge he had chosen not to share. She put the phone back to her ear. "The operation was authorized by whom?" she said. Her voice was completely flat. At the time, Moat said, the Viscari organization was significantly smaller. "Your husband was 22 years old and working under a man named Caruso, who ran the Providence territory. Caruso authorized it. Viscari was the operational lead." A beat. He was trying to prove himself. The target was a Veil's supply chain interdiction. Your mother was not supposed to be there. But she was. But she was. Elena's hand on the phone was steady. She was aware of it being steady in the way you become aware of specific physical facts about yourself when everything else is moving. Her hand was steady, and her breathing was controlled, and inside her chest something was happening that she did not have a word for yet. "You're telling me this now," she said. 5 hours before a negotiation. Why? "Because the negotiation is bad for my employers," Moat said. "And because I want you to understand that the man you are about to hand a lifeline to is the same man who took the most important thing your father ever had." Another pause. Quieter this time. Less performed. "I'm giving you truth, Miss Vale. What you do with it is your business. But I'd suggest that Roman Vale does not know you know this. And I'd further suggest that if he finds out you knew and still brought Vescari to the table, I understand the implication." "Good." The call ended. Elena stood in the corridor, 5:23 in the morning. The overhead lights hummed. The carpet under her feet was the color of dried blood, and she had not noticed that before, and now she could not stop noticing it. Behind the door of 3912, she heard movement. Adrian getting dressed. The sound of a drawer. The sound of his shoes on the floor. She had approximately 90 seconds before that door opened. She thought about her mother. She thought about a warehouse in Providence 12 years ago. She thought about a 22-year-old Adrian Vescari trying to prove himself to a man named Caruso, making a decision in the operational urgency of a night that was probably not so different from this one. A night with a deadline and a target and no clear view of the full cost of what he was doing. She thought about the child she was carrying. 4 weeks. The size of nothing. Already the most complicated thing in her life. She thought about 14,000 people across 2 organizations. She thought about war. The door handle of 3912 moved. Elena put her phone in her coat pocket. She squared her shoulders. She turned to face the door. Adrian came out into the corridor. He was dressed, jacket on, tie in his hand, not yet knotted. He looked like a man who had slept badly and was running on the particular fuel of someone who understands that the situation requires them to function regardless of what they feel. His eyes found her immediately, and there was something in them that was not quite hope, but was in the direction of it, tentative and undefended in a way she had not seen in years. She looked at him, and she made a decision that she did not fully understand in that moment, but that she would spend a long time afterward examining. She looked at him, and she did not tell him what she knew. Not yet. Not here, at 5 in the morning, in a hotel corridor with 11 hours left and a war waiting at the edge of it. Not before she had spoken to her father, not before she understood the full shape of what Harlan Moat had given her, and why he had given it, and what he expected her to do with it, because information offered by someone like Mote was never just information. It was a tool with a specific intended use, and she needed to understand the intended use before she picked it up. "Garrett," she said, "where is he right now?" Adrian's eyes shifted slightly. "Upstairs." "Why? Is he alone?" "As far as I know. Elena, what?" "I need you to call him right now," she said. "Tell him you're coming up. Tell him to have the documentation ready that he found earlier. Don't tell him anything else. Don't tell him I'm with you. Don't tell him what we discussed." She held his eyes. "Can you do that without it reading wrong?" Adrian looked at her for a moment. He was reading her, and she was letting him read just enough. Enough to know there was urgency, not enough to know the source of it. "Something happened," he said. "Call Garrett." He pulled out his phone and called. Elena watched his face as it rang, watched for the micro-expressions that 11 years of marriage had taught her to read. The small tells that she had spent years not looking for, because looking would have meant knowing, and there had been periods when she had chosen not to know. She was done with that. "Garrett." Adrian's voice was level, professional. Whatever else he was very good at this. "Come down to 39. Bring the file." "Yeah." A pause. "Now." He ended the call. He looked at her. 4 minutes. "Good. Are you going to tell me what's happening?" "When Garrett gets here." "Elena." 4 minutes, Adrian." She looked at him steadily. "There's something I need to see when I tell you. I need Garrett in the room when I tell you. That's all I'm going to say right now, and I need you to trust that I have a reason." He looked at her for a long moment. She could see the conflict in it. The instinct of a man who controlled information for a living being asked to cede the pace to someone else, even someone he had just in the last hour fundamentally re-understood. It was not easy for him. She did not expect it to be easy. "Okay," he said. They waited in the corridor without speaking. The hotel was beginning its early morning sounds. A cart somewhere on another floor, the distant machinery of the building's ventilation, the specific acoustic quality of a large structure beginning to wake. Elena stood with her back to the wall and her hands in her coat pockets and her eyes on the elevator at the end of the corridor. Garrett Fossey came out of the elevator at 5:29. He was still in the same clothes from the evening before, jacket slightly rumpled, the file tucked under his left arm. He saw Adrian first, and then his eyes moved to Elena, and something happened in them. Something very small and very fast that lasted less than a second before his face settled into the expression of a reliable man responding to a summons. But Elena had been watching for it, and she had seen it. It was not surprise. That was the thing. A man who had spent the night in the penthouse, genuinely unaware of developments, should have registered surprise at seeing Elena in the corridor at 5:30 in the morning, given that the last time he saw her she was leaving to make phone calls, and the situation had been, from his perspective, unresolved. He was not surprised to see her here. He had adjusted to her presence in the time it took to blink, which was the adjustment of a man who already knew approximately where she would be. "Garrett," she said, "I need to see your phone." The corridor went very still. Garrett looked at her. He looked at Adrian. His right hand, which had been at his side, moved perhaps 2 inches toward his jacket pocket and then stopped, because Adrian was watching and the 2 inches was already too much. "My phone," he said, flat, buying time. "Right now, hand it to Adrian." "Elena, what?" "Your phone, Garrett." Adrian's voice had changed. Something had shifted in it during the 2 inches of hand movement and the half-second of hesitation, because Adrian Viscari had built a career on reading the half-second, and what he had read in this one was enough. "Give it to me." Garrett Foss stood in the corridor of the 39th floor and made the calculation that people in his position make when their options have reduced to the point where all of them are bad. The calculation of which bad option is least catastrophic. And he reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone and held it out. Adrian took it. Elena said, "Call log, last 72 hours. Adrian navigated to it. He scrolled. His face did not change, but the quality of his stillness changed. It became the stillness of someone receiving a current, the body's response to something moving through it that it wasn't designed to carry. He held the phone out to Elena without speaking. She looked at the screen. The number she had received the photograph from. Called 6 times in the past 48 hours. Received 4 times. Most recently at 4:51 this morning, 32 minutes ago, while Garrett was supposedly alone in the penthouse. She handed the phone back to Adrian. 12 years ago, Elena said, looking at Garrett. Providence. You were with him. Not a question. She was constructing it in real time from the operational summary she had read, from Mote's careful specificity. From the way Garrett's face was doing the thing faces do when the specific truth has been named, and there is no longer any architecture left to hide behind. You were part of the Caruso operation. You were there when my mother died. The corridor was absolutely silent. Garrett looked at her. He looked at Adrian. He looked at the floor for exactly 1 second, and then he looked back up, and the look he came back up with was the look of a man who has spent 12 years waiting for a specific moment and has just arrived at it and found that arrival is not the relief that waiting imagines it to be. It was an accident, he said. I know, Elena said. I know it was an accident. That's not the question. She took 1 step toward him. The question is why you've been feeding our position to Harlan Mote for the past 8 weeks. The question is whether it was guilt or money, or whether Mote found the Providence file and used it as leverage. The question is how much they know about tonight. Garrett's jaw was tight. He was looking at Adrian now, not at her. And the look between those two men had the specific weight of 11 years of something that was not quite friendship and not quite employment, and was actually something harder to name and more durable than either. The specific bond of men who have done dangerous things together and trusted each other with the consequence. And Elena watched that weight bear down on both of them, and she said nothing because some moments require the space to complete themselves. Leverage, Garrett said finally. He said it to Adrian. They found the file. Moat came to me 6 months ago. He said if I didn't, he said he'd make sure Roman Vale got the documentation with your name on the authorization. His voice was rough, not quite steady. I couldn't. Adrian, if Vale had gotten that file, Vale would have killed me, Adrian said. Very quiet. Yes. So you fed them my operation to keep me alive.
Garrett's eyes were red at the edges. The picking at his thumb had started again, the raw automatic gesture of a man whose composure had run out of architecture to stand on. I know how that sounds. I know. He looked at Elena. I didn't know who you were. I swear to you, I didn't know until that file came last night. Moat sent it to me. He sent it to make sure the negotiation blew up, to make sure you and Adrian had the worst possible. I understand what he was doing, Elena said.
He wanted the war, Garrett said.
Moretti needs the war. If Vale and Viscari unify, Moretti loses every competitive advantage they have in the Northeast. The only way they stay relevant is if both organizations bleed each other out. He pressed his hand over his mouth for a moment. I've been trying to manage it. I've been trying to give them enough to keep them satisfied without giving them anything that would... The Prescott meeting, Adrian said.
Garrett flinched. That was a mistake. I didn't know Prescott was the linchpin. I didn't...
Stop. Adrian's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Stop explaining. Garrett stopped. The corridor was silent except for the building's distant sounds and the faint gray morning light coming through the window at the far end, and the three of them stood in it like figures at the end of something long and exhausting. Elena looked at her watch, 5:37, 10 hours and 53 minutes to Roman's deadline. Here's what's going to happen, she said. Both men looked at her. She had not raised her voice. She had not needed to for the entire duration of this conversation, and she did not need to now. Garrett, you're going to call Moat back. You're going to tell him the negotiation collapsed. You're going to tell him Elena Vale left the hotel 40 minutes ago and Adrian Viscari is unresponsive and the situation is deteriorating. She held his eyes. You're going to be extremely convincing. Garrett looked at Adrian. Adrian looked at Elena. And then? Adrian said. And then we have approximately 10 hours to get to Manhattan, sit across from my father, and put a framework on the table before he decides the silence is a declaration. She buttoned the top button of her coat. And then there's something I need to tell you, she said to Adrian, that I'm going to tell you on the plane. Not here, not now, but before we land. You need to hear it from me and not from anyone else. She met his eyes, held them. You understand what I'm saying? Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face said that he understood. Not the content, but the shape of it, the weight of it, the fact that it was the kind of thing that required a plane over open air and no corridor walls and nowhere for either of them to go but toward it. Yeah, he said. I understand. Good. She looked at Garrett. Make the call. Then you're coming with us. Because if you stay here, Moat will know something went wrong within the hour, and I need him thinking this is over for as long as possible. She paused. Can you do that? Garrett looked at her. The red at the edges of his eyes had not gone away. He looked at Adrian one more time, the look of a man asking a question that had no clean answer and knowing it. And then he looked back at Elena and nodded. Yes, he said, I can do that. Then do it now. He took his phone from Adrian and walked to the far end of the corridor and made the call. Elena watched his back and the set of his shoulders and the way his posture shifted when Moat picked up. The specific physical performance of a man delivering bad news, which was either genuine distress at the deception or genuine distress at everything else. And at this point, the distinction barely mattered. Adrian moved to stand beside her. Not close, but beside. Providence, he said. Very low. Not a question. Not quite. She looked at the carpet, the color of it, the specific dark red of it under the corridor lights. On the plane, she said. He was quiet for a moment. How bad? She looked at him then, directly. She let him see enough, not all of it, not the weight of what she had read and what she had felt reading it, and what she had decided in the 90 seconds before he walked out of that door, but enough for him to understand that what was coming was not a small thing, that it was the kind of thing that would require something from him that was larger than an apology and harder than regret. Bad, she said. He nodded.
He accepted it. He stood beside her in the corridor in the gray morning light, and he looked down the hall to where Garrett was finishing the call. And Elena watched his profile in the low light, and she thought about love. Not the feeling of it, but the architecture of it, the load-bearing quality of it, the way it could be structurally present even after the visible surface of it had been damaged. And she thought about what it would mean to tell him on the plane and to watch him receive it. She thought about what she would do with what he gave her back. Garrett ended the call and walked back to them. "Done," he said. "He believes it. How long do we have?" "He'll sit on it for 2, maybe 3 hours before he makes another move. He'll want to verify through secondary sources." "That's enough." Elena was already moving toward the elevator. "We leave in 20 minutes. I need to make one call first." She pressed the elevator button. The car came. She stepped in. The call she needed to make was to her father. She needed to tell him the negotiation was still on. She needed to buy the morning. She needed to do both of those things without telling him what she knew about Providence, because if Roman Vale learned tonight that his daughter had been told, there was no version of that revelation that ended with a negotiation. There was only what Roman Vale did to men who had been responsible for Catherine Vale's death, accidentally or otherwise, and Elena could not allow that outcome with a child in her body and a war at the door and 14,000 people on the other side of it. She made the call. Roman answered first ring. She told him the framework was intact. She told him Adrian was cooperating. She told him they would be wheels up within the hour and in Manhattan before noon. Her father was quiet for a moment. Then, "You sound different." "I'm tired," she said. "It's been a long night." Another pause. Roman Vale's pauses reading something, always. "The Moretti asset?" "Neutralized for now." And Viscari, a beat. "He understands what he's agreeing to. He understands. Then I'll have the room prepared." A pause. "Elena." "Yes." "Your mother would have—" He stopped, which was extraordinary. Roman Vale did not stop. Roman Vale was constitutionally opposed to stopping. He began a sentence and the sentence ended, and in the space where the rest of it should have been, there was 12 years of something that he had never once given her direct access to. "Come home," he said. "Bring him. We'll talk." She ended the call. She was in the elevator. She pressed the button for 42. She needed her overnight bag. She needed her documentation. She needed 12 minutes alone in the penthouse to stand in the room where she had cooked ossobuco from scratch and scraped it into the trash, and to stand there for exactly as long as she needed to, and then to pick up her bag and go. The elevator rose. The city outside the building was fully in its gray early morning now. The night burned off. The storm reduced to a drizzle that was barely distinguishable from the general damp of a winter dawn. She had 1 hour before they needed to move. 1 hour in which Harlan Mote believed the negotiation was dead. 1 hour in which Roman Vale was preparing a room for a conversation that he did not know was going to be the hardest one of his life. 1 hour before she had to get on a plane with the man she had married and tell him something that would require both of them to decide, in real time and at altitude with nowhere to go, who they were going to be on the other side of the truth. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. She walked into the penthouse. She set her phone on the bar cart beside the untouched Scotch glass from the night before. Still there, the ice long melted, the glass leaving a ring on the wood. And she looked at it. Then her phone buzzed. A message. "Garrett. Mote's moving faster than I said. He knows." Someone inside the hotel tipped him. "We have maybe 40 minutes. And then a second message, 3 seconds behind the first, from a number she had never seen before but that carried the same routing prefix as the earlier anonymous call. "He's not coming to negotiate, Miss Vale. He's coming to the hotel, 20 minutes out, and he's not coming alone." Elena looked at the 2 messages. She looked at the Scotch glass on the bar cart. She looked at the gray morning through the 42nd floor window. She picked up her phone. She called Adrian. He answered before the first ring completed. "Get Garrett and get up here," she said. "Right now. Don't use the elevator. Take the stairs." She was already moving toward the closet, toward the back panel, toward the things she had stored there 18 months ago for an emergency that she had hoped would never require them. "Mote is 4 minutes away and he is not coming to talk." "Elena!" "Stairs! Now!" She pulled the panel open. She looked at what was there. Not weapons.
She had told herself not weapons. She had built this life on the premise of not weapons. She looked at the documentation, the sealed letter, the organizational files, and beside them, in a case she had placed there without fully examining why, the thing she had brought from Manhattan 9 days ago when she had driven to Las Vegas with the intention of finally telling the truth. The thing she had told herself was precautionary and unnecessary, and that she would probably bring home unused. She reached for it. She picked it up. She was not her father's daughter for nothing. And 18 months of hoping the worst wouldn't happen had just run out of road. And Harlan Moat was 12 minutes from this building with people she had not planned for. And the child she was carrying was 4 weeks old and already the most important reason she had ever had to make sure she came out the other side of this night still standing. She checked the weight of it in her hand. She set it in her coat pocket. She closed the panel. She turned around and Adrian and Garrett came through the stairwell door at the end of the hall, both of them breathing hard from 42 floors. And Adrian looked at her, and looked at her coat pocket, and looked at her face, and he did not ask. "What do we need?" he said. Elena looked at both of them. The gray morning was fully in the windows now, and the city below was waking up and going about its business with the complete indifference of cities to the specific catastrophes of the people inside them. "There's a service exit on the 14th floor," she said. "Loading dock. Takes you out to a side street off Koval Lane. I need a car that isn't registered to either of us on that street in 8 minutes. She looked at Garrett. "You have a contact for that?" "Yes." "Call them now." Garrett called. Adrian looked at Elena. She looked back at him. In the gray morning light in the penthouse, where she had built a life that was always going to cost this much, she looked at the man she had married and the man who had made the mistake she had not yet told him about, and she made the only calculation that actually mattered in this moment. Not strategic, not organizational, not political. The simple human calculation of whether she was still willing to fight for something that had been this badly broken. She was. She didn't know yet what that meant for everything else. She didn't know what it meant for Providence or her father or the negotiation or the next 12 hours. She only knew that she was still standing in this room and she had not left and she was not going to leave, and that was the most honest thing she had felt since the night had begun. "Car's 4 minutes out," Garrett said. "Then we move," Elena said. And the three of them went into the stairwell and the door closed behind them, and the penthouse was empty and quiet, with the gray morning coming through the windows and the melted Scotch glass on the bar cart and the 2 untouched plates long since thrown away, and the life that might have been sitting in the room like something that had not yet decided whether it was. The service exit on the 14th floor smelled like linen carts, an industrial cleaner, and the specific neutrality of spaces that exist only to move things through without being noticed. Elena went first. She pushed the heavy door open with her shoulder, and the cold morning air came in hard. Not raining anymore, just wet. The sidewalk dark and gleaming under the loading dock lights. The street beyond it beginning its first quiet movements of early morning. A delivery truck idled half a block north. Somewhere a dog was barking at something it had decided was worth barking at. The city in its gray, pragmatic dawn, indifferent and continuous. The car was there. A dark sedan, nothing memorable, engine running. The driver did not turn around when they got in. Garrett took the front. Elena and Adrian took the back. The car moved. Nobody spoke for 2 blocks. Elena watched the side mirror. No one behind them. Koval Lane gave way to Tropicana, and Tropicana opened up and the driver took them east, away from the strip. Away from the Aldonis Tower, away from room 3912 and its particular inventory of the night. "Airport," Elena said. The driver nodded. She looked at her phone. 6:04, no messages from Moat. Either he was in the hotel and hadn't found the empty penthouse yet, or he had found it and was running his own calculation about what to do next. She gave them 20 minutes before he understood they were gone, possibly 30 if the hotel staff was unhelpful. She looked at Adrian beside her. He was looking out the window on his side, his jaw tight, his hands in his lap. He had not spoken since the stairwell. He had kept pace with her down 42 floors of concrete stairs without complaint, and when they had come through the door into the loading corridor, he had put his hand briefly on the back of her coat. Not a grip, not a pull, just a touch, the flat of his hand between her shoulder blades for perhaps 3 seconds, and then taken it away. She had not commented on it, neither had he. "Garrett," she said. "Yeah."
When we land in New York, you're going to go directly to the Prescott situation, and you're going to begin damage control. I'll give you the contacts you need. My father's legal team will assist." She paused. "After that, what happens to you is not my decision. You understand that?" Garrett was looking at the road ahead. "I understand. Adrian will make that decision. I won't influence it." She looked at the side mirror again, still clear. "But I'll tell you this. You spent 6 months feeding information to people who wanted a war, and some of that information put people in danger, and you'll have to live with what that cost. But you were protecting him." She said it without inflection, just the fact of it. People have done worse things for worse reasons. What you do with the rest of it is yours. Garrett said nothing. He pressed his mouth together and looked at the road. Adrian turned from the window and looked at Elena. She met his eyes. "Providence," he said, quietly. Just the word. Putting it on the table between them the way you put something down when you've been carrying it long enough that your arms are done. "On the plane," she said. "I need to know if you already know." She held his gaze. Yes. He looked at her. He absorbed it. She watched him absorb it, and she watched what it cost him. The specific physical cost of it, the way his shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch and his jaw muscle worked, and his eyes did something that was not quite the thing she expected. It was not defensiveness. It was not the rapid construction of justification that men sometimes put up when they are confronted with old damage. It was something rawer and more finished than that. The look of a man who has carried a specific weight for a long time and has just been told by someone he loves that she knows what he's been carrying, and the knowing is worse than anything he had imagined, and also, in some way he cannot yet name, a relief. "Okay," he said, very quiet. "Okay," she said back. Not forgiveness, not absolution, just the word, which contained the fact of continuing, which was what she had decided in the 90 seconds outside that hotel room door, and which she was standing by. The car drove east. The sky was fully light now, the color of pewter giving way to something cleaner, the sun not yet visible but its intention apparent in the brightening above the eastern edge of the desert. Las Vegas behind them was going through its daily transformation, from the city of the previous night into the city of the coming day, cleaning itself up, resetting, performing the function of a place that has made its peace with the fact that what happens inside it tends to stay there. Not this time. This time the night was coming with them. The plane was a charter, 8 seats. It smelled like leather and recycled air, and it lifted off at 7:12 with the desert spread below it in the early light, pale and enormous and indifferent. Garrett sat at the rear of the cabin with his phone and the beginning of the Prescott damage control. The pilot had been given New York. Elena and Adrian sat across from each other at the front of the cabin with the small table between them and nothing else. She told him. She told him everything, not the way she had rehearsed it. The rehearsed version had been careful and sequential and built toward the most important detail from a prepared foundation. This was not that. This was the truth told in the order it had happened, which was the only order she had left. She told him about the call from Mote. She told him about the secure email and the attachment. She told him about the operational summary and her mother's name in the 4th paragraph and the word beside it. She told him about the warehouse in Providence and the Caruso operation, and the intelligence that put him there as the operational lead at 22 years old trying to prove something to a man who was not worth proving anything to. She told him she was not telling him because she wanted something from him in response. She was telling him because he was going to sit across from Roman Vale in approximately 4 hours, and she would not allow him to walk into that room carrying something Roman might use against him before she had given him the chance to carry it himself. She told him that Roman did not know she knew. She told him she had not yet decided what that meant for the conversation in Manhattan. She told him all of this in a level voice with her hands flat on the table between them and her eyes on his face. And she watched him receive each piece of it, and she did not look away at any point, not even when the watching was hard. Adrian sat across from her, and he let her finish. He did not speak during it. He did not move except for one moment, when she said her mother's name, when she said Catherine Vale, and said the word beside it, when he closed his eyes. Just for a second. The closing of them and the opening of them again, and what was there after the opening was different from what had been there before. It was the face of a man for whom something had completed, a circuit closing, Something that had been unresolved in him for 12 years finding its shape at last. Not because the damage was repaired, but because it had been named by someone with the standing to name it. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. The plane flew east. The desert below them gave way to scrubland and then the first faint suggestions of elevation as they crossed into Arizona airspace. The sun was up properly now, coming through the small oval window and laying a stripe of light across the table between them. "I was 22, he said, not as mitigation, as context. The way you offer context when you know it isn't mitigation and you're not pretending it is. I know. Caruso gave me the target. I didn't know the warehouse would be. I didn't know anyone was going to be." He stopped, pressed his mouth shut, tried again. "When I found out what happened, after. I went back, I tried to. There was nothing to do. She was already." He stopped again. He looked at his hands on the table. "I've been in this business for 22 years and I have done things I don't regret because they were the price of what I was building and I accepted the price. But that is not one of those things." He looked up at her. "That has never been one of those things." Elena looked at him. She believed him. Not because she needed to believe him, not because it was easier to believe him, but because she had spent 6 years learning the texture of Adrian Vescari's relationship with his own conscience, and what she saw in his face right now was consistent with what she knew. A man who had organized his entire adult life around building something permanent and controlled partly because he had spent one night at 22 years old experiencing what happened when things were not permanent and not controlled. And the cost of that was borne by someone who had nothing to do with the work. "My father will know when he looks at you," she said. "He will know in the first 60 seconds. He has been looking at men across tables for 40 years, and he reads them the way you read rooms. If you try to hide it, he'll know you're hiding something, and that is worse than the thing itself." Adrian looked at her. "You want me to tell him? I want you to decide. Before we land, before we walk into that room, I want you to decide who you are going to be in there, because I cannot make that decision for you. And the decision you make will determine whether what my father and I are about to attempt in that room is possible or not." He was quiet. The plane flew. The sun moved in the window. "If I tell him," Adrian said, "he may not be able to get past it." "That's possible. The whole negotiation, I know. Everything we've been working toward tonight." "Adrian," she held his eyes. "I know. I've run every version of this since 5 in the morning. I know what it costs. I'm asking you anyway." He looked at her for a long time. The stripe of sunlight between them. The sound of the plane, steady and impersonal. "Why?" he said. And this time it was a genuine question, not defensive, not rhetorical. The question of a man trying to understand something about the person across from him that he had apparently been trying to understand for 6 years and had kept getting wrong. "Because I am carrying your child," she said. "And I will not raise that child with a father she cannot look in the eyes when she's old enough to know what her father is." She paused. "And because my mother deserves to have her name in a room that can hear it, even if it costs everything else." Adrian looked at her. He looked at her for so long and with such completeness that she felt it the way you feel sustained attention from someone who has not been fully present for a long time. Like sun on skin that hasn't been in the light in years. Uncomfortable at first, then something else. "Okay," he said. "Okay. I'll tell him." She nodded. She looked out the window at the country below them. Her country, in some abstract sense. The country she had been born into and moved through and tried to leave and been pulled back into. The country whose particular darkness she had grown up inside of and made her choices about and was still, at 38 years old and 4 weeks pregnant and coming in from the longest night of her life, still inside of. She thought about Aurora. She did not know yet that she would name her daughter Aurora. That decision was months away, made on a different night in a hospital in Manhattan with the specific exhausted clarity of a woman who has just done the hardest physical thing a human body can do. But she thought about the child. She thought about what she owed her. Not safety exactly, because safety was a lie this world told itself. Not ease. Something more honest than either of those things. A clear account, she thought. A mother who told the truth. A life built on what was actually there rather than what was easier to see. She looked back at Adrian. "When we land," she said, "let me speak first. Give me 10 minutes with him alone. Then I'll bring you in." "What will you tell him?" The truth, she said, like I should have done 18 months ago. Roman Vale's Manhattan residence was a brownstone on the Upper East Side that did not announce itself in any way that would cause a person walking past to look twice. No visible security, no gate. A black front door with a brass handle that had been polished so consistently for so many years that the brass was worn flat in the center. Elena had grown up going through that door, and the specific texture of the handle's worn center was one of the first things she felt when she pressed her palm against it. It was 11:47 in the morning. Roman was in the room at the end of the ground floor hallway, the one he had used as a study for 30 years, the one that smelled like paper and old wood, and the particular atmospheric quality of a room where serious things had been decided for a very long time. He was seated at the table when Elena came in, not the desk, the round table in the center of the room that he used when he wanted a conversation to be between equals, which was rare enough that Elena noticed it. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, with the full and undivided attention of a man for whom attention was the primary instrument of his existence. And in the first 3 seconds of that look, he read something in her that made him sit very still. "You look like your mother," he said. He said it the way he said things that cost him, quietly, without setup, as if the only way to get them out was without runway. Elena sat down across from him. She put her coat on the back of the chair. She folded her hands on the table. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. Can you do that?" Roman looked at her. Yes. She told him about Providence. She told him she had learned it in the early hours of that morning from Harlan Mote, who had intended it as a weapon, who had calculated that the knowledge would destroy the negotiation and send her to Roman with blood in her eyes instead of a framework. She told him that she understood why Mote had made that calculation, and she told him that he had been wrong. She told him that she already knew Adrian would tell him himself. She told him she was pregnant. Roman Vale sat across from his daughter in the room where serious things had been decided for 30 years, and he received each piece of what she said without expression, which was not the same as without feeling. She knew the difference, had spent a lifetime learning it. And when she was finished, he was quiet for a very long time. The clock on the desk ticked. Outside, the Upper East Side went about its noon business. A bus, a car horn, once. The compressed ordinary sounds of a city that did not know or care that this room existed. He was 22, Roman said finally. Yes. Caruso's operation. Yes. Caruso died in 2019. Not relevant. Not irrelevant. Just the fact, placed there. I know. Roman looked at his hands on the table. His steady, unwrinkled hands, the hands of a man who had somehow carried 71 years without looking it. I had 3 investigators over 8 years, he said, looking into what happened to your mother. None of them found this. He paused. That tells me how carefully it was buried, and by whom. Mote's people. Moretti's intelligence arm. They've had it for years. It's their insurance. Against Vescari, against you, against anyone who might move to consolidate the Northeast. And they gave it to you to use against him. Yes. Instead, you're telling me. He looked up. Why? Elena looked at her father, 71 years old, silver-haired, straight-backed, the gravity of him in that room as constant and specific as the smell of old paper. She had spent her entire life in the presence of this man's authority, and had spent 12 years trying to build something outside of it. And in the end, she was sitting across from him in his study at noon in Manhattan, with the negotiation of her life waiting in the hallway and the truth she had always known about him, made more complicated and more complete by the truth she now knew about where she came from and where she had chosen to go. Because you are my father, she said, and because she was my mother, and because no one in this family has been honest in so long that we've forgotten it's an option. She held his eyes. And because I need you to meet this man as who he actually is, not who Moretti wants you to think he is, not who his worst night made him, who he actually is. She paused. Because I chose him, and my choices are mine, and I need you to reckon with that. Roman looked at her for a very long time. The clock ticked. Then he stood up. He walked to the window that overlooked the small rear garden, bare in the winter, the branches of the single oak tree dark against the gray sky, the garden furniture put away, everything in its waiting posture. He stood there with his hands behind his back, and Elena let him stand there and did not fill the silence with anything because some silences are the work itself and not the pause before it. "Bring him in," Roman said. Elena went to the hallway. Adrian was standing near the front door, jacket on, hands at his sides. He looked at her when she came out and she nodded, and he followed her back down the hall. He walked into the room and Roman turned from the window, and the two men looked at each other for the first time without the mediating distance of rumors and operational intelligence and the inherited geography of their competing territories. Just two men in a room, both of them carrying things, the winter light coming in gray through the window. "Mr. Vale," Adrian said. Roman looked at him, the full attention, measured and complete. "Before anything else," Adrian said, "before any framework or negotiation or anything you've come here to discuss, there is something I need to say to you directly." His voice was level, not rehearsed. Elena could hear the unrehearsed quality of it, the specific unsteadiness of a man saying something that costs him without the protection of performance. In 2012, I was the operational lead on an interdiction in Providence that targeted a Vale supply chain. There was a fire. Your wife was in the building. He stopped for exactly 1 second. "She should not have been there. I did not know she was there. And I have known for 12 years that knowing that does not change what happened, and that there is nothing I can offer you that is proportionate to that." He held Roman's eyes. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm just telling you the truth because your daughter asked me to be the kind of man who tells the truth, and I'm trying to decide to be that man. So, that's what I have." "Bamti?" The room was very quiet. Roman Vale looked at Adrian Viscari for a long time. Elena watched her father, and she thought about what he was doing behind those eyes. The calculation, yes, always the calculation, but underneath it, something that was not calculation. Something that had to do with a woman he had loved for 30 years and lost, and had spent 12 years carrying in the specific way that men like him carry things, without words, without display, as pure private weight. "Sit down," Roman said. Both men sat. Roman sat. Elena sat. And Roman Vale, who had not cried at his wife's funeral because he had not permitted himself to, who had run an empire for 40 years on the bedrock principle that sentiment was a liability. You managed rather than a condition you inhabited, looked at the table between them and said nothing for 30 seconds. And in those 30 seconds, Elena watched something move across her father's face that she had not seen there in 12 years. "She loved Osobuco," he said. Very quiet. Elena felt something break open in her chest, small and complete. The way things break that have been under pressure for a long time. "I know," she said. "I learned to make it from her recipe." Roman looked at her. His eyes were dry. He was not a man who cried, and he did not cry now. But the quality of his looking was different than it had been an hour ago, softer in the specific way that things become softer after a long pressure has been released, not weaker, just changed in its texture. "The framework," he said, finally, returning to it. "Show me what you have." They were in that room for 4 hours. It was not easy. Nothing about it was easy, and Elena had not expected it to be. Roman Vale did not become 71 years old and the head of a 60-year organization by making easy decisions. And he asked questions that cut to the structural bone of what Adrian was proposing, and he did not accept answers that were not specific. And he pushed on the financial arrangements with the precision of a man who had seen every version of a bad deal dressed as a good one. And Adrian answered. He answered directly, and he revised when Roman found the weakness in something and he did not perform certainty he didn't have, which was something Elena had never seen from him in a professional context, and which she suspected was new or not new, but recently chosen. The decision made somewhere over Arizona to be the kind of man who told the truth as an operational principle and not just when it was convenient. By 4 p.m, they had the outline of something, not a completed framework, that would take weeks and attorneys and people with specific expertise in financial restructuring. But the outline, the load-bearing shape of an agreement that would bring 2 organizations under coordinated governance, that would redirect resources from territorial competition into consolidated financial infrastructure, that would make both operations significantly more defensible legally and physically than they had been as separate entities. It would take a year to build properly. It would require Roman to cede certain autonomous controls he had held for decades. It would require Adrian to accept a subordinate position in the combined structure that his ego would need to make its peace with over time. Neither man said it was perfect. Neither man said it was what they would have chosen. They said it was what was there, and they accepted what was there. At 4:17, Roman stood and extended his hand across the table to Adrian Viscari. Adrian stood and took it. They held it for a moment. Not long, not performative, just the physical acknowledgement of two men who had arrived somewhere neither of them had expected to arrive, and who understood that the arriving had cost more than they had budgeted. Then Roman looked at Elena. He looked at her the way he had looked at her at 11:47 in the study, the full attention, but different now, completed by something. "Your mother would have found this very satisfying," he said. Elena said nothing. She held his eyes and she felt the thing in her chest that had broken open, and she let it stay open because she had been closing it for a long time, and she was tired of it. Harlan Mote was arrested at 6:43 that evening at McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas, attempting to board a flight to Zurich. The arrest was federal, coordinated through a contact of Roman Vales in the Attorney General's office, based on a package of documentation that Elena had assembled during the 4 hours on the plane and in the car and in the waiting time outside Roman's study. The package included Garrett's phone records, Celeste Quinn's communications with Mote, and a set of organizational documents tracing Moretti's intelligence operation through 3 years of coordinated interference in both Vale and Viscari affairs. It was not a clean package. It would produce complicated legal proceedings that would run for 2 years and produce mixed results. But it removed Harlan Mote from operational capacity for long enough to matter, and it sent a message through the Moretti organization about the cost of the specific operation they had run. And in this world, that message had value. Celeste Quinn cooperated. She cooperated thoroughly and immediately with the kind of practical self-preservation that Elena had always known was the truest thing about her. She was relocated and given certain assurances in exchange for testimony, and she disappeared from Las Vegas and from Adrian Viscari's life as completely as if she had never been in either. Garrett Foss resigned from the Viscari organization in writing the following morning. He wrote 2 letters, one to Adrian, which Elena never read and did not ask about, and one to Elena, which she read once and then put away. The letter to Elena was not long. It said that he was sorry, and that he hoped she understood that sorry was not adequate, and that he had made the choices he had made because he loved the man he worked for, even when loving him had cost too much, and that he recognized this was not her problem to solve. It said one other thing, at the end, which she did not put away with the rest of the letter, but kept separately, in the inside pocket of the coat she had worn through that night, and which she found months later when she was cleaning out the coat, and which she read again and then kept. It said, "I've known a lot of people in this business who were worth protecting. You're the first one I ever met who didn't need it." The months that followed were not a resolution. They were a construction. Slower than Elena had imagined, harder in the ways she had anticipated, and easier in the ways she had not. The combined organization took shape across the winter and into spring. There were legal complications and personnel conflicts, and 3 separate moments when Roman and Adrian sat across from each other with the outline between them, and something cracked and required resetting. And in each of those moments it was Elena who found the adjustment that held. Not because she was the smartest person in the room, though she frequently was, because she was the one who understood both sides of the table from the inside, who had been Roman's daughter and Adrian's wife, and neither of those things fully and both of them completely, and who had spent 6 years and one very long night learning that the space between two people's versions of the truth is where the actual work gets done. Adrian was different, not transformed. She was not interested in transformation as a concept, in the sudden revision of a person's essential nature, because she did not believe in it and had not seen evidence that it happened. But different. He was quieter in rooms than he had been. He listened at the actual beginning of conversations rather than in the final third. He came home when he said he would come home. These were small things. She knew they were small things. She received them as what they were, without inflating them into promises and without dismissing them as insufficient. They were what he could do right now, and right now was what she had. She did not forgive him for Providence in a single moment. She did not forgive him for that night in Las Vegas in a single moment either. Forgiveness in her experience was not a moment. It was a practice. Daily, sometimes hourly, The choice to put something down and keep walking rather than carry it and stop moving. She made that choice on a recurring basis, and sometimes it was easier than other times, and she had decided that was acceptable. That acceptable was enough. In February, she moved back to New York. Adrian moved with her. They lived in an apartment on the west side, not a penthouse, not a tower, something at street level with windows that looked out onto a courtyard where a single tree grew, bare in February, and then in March beginning to show the first tentative green of coming leaves. She stood at those windows sometimes in the evenings, when Adrian was in the other room and the city was going about its constant business outside, and she thought about the night in Las Vegas, about the corridor and the elevator and the osobuco in the trash and the sealed letter in her coat pocket, and all the versions of that night that had not happened and the version that had. She thought about her mother in a warehouse in Providence in 2012, which was a thing she would never stop thinking about, that had simply taken its permanent place in the architecture of her. She thought about Roman Vale extending his hand across a table on the Upper East Side, and the way he had said her mother's name when she walked in. She thought about the child. Aurora Vale Viscari was born in June at a hospital on the East Side at 6:40 in the morning. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, dark hair, which Elena had expected, eyes that were not yet their permanent color, which Elena had not thought about and found she could spend an unreasonable amount of time studying. Roman came to the hospital the afternoon of the birth and stood in the room and held his granddaughter for 11 minutes without speaking. Elena watched him hold the baby, and she watched his face do something she had not seen it do in 38 years of watching it. When he gave Aurora back to her, he looked at Elena and he said, "She has her grandmother's hands." He left after that, not rudely, purposefully, the way Roman Vale always moved, with intention, as if lingering was something he hadn't learned and wasn't going to start now. But at the door he stopped and turned back, and he looked at Elena in the hospital bed with the baby in the crook of her arm and the afternoon light coming in the window. And he looked at her for a long moment with the full and complete attention she had grown up under. "You did well," he said, which was, from Roman Vale, an entire world. Adrian was in the chair beside the bed. He had been there since 4 in the morning, since before the hard part, since before everything. He had been there in the way that he was different now, quietly, without announcing it, without making it about the fact of his being there, just there. Elena had looked at him at various points through the night and found him each time watching her with the expression of a man who has decided that witnessing something is the most important thing he can do and is doing it fully. After Roman left, the room was quiet. The afternoon light came in at an angle that made the room look warmer than it was. The baby was asleep. The particular sleep of the very new, which Elena had been told about, and which nothing had adequately prepared her for. The completeness of it, the abandonment of it, the way Aurora slept as if sleeping was the only thing that had ever been required of her. Adrian got up from the chair and came to sit on the edge of the bed. He looked at Aurora, then he looked at Elena. "Aurora Vale Viscari," he said, quietly, tasting the name. "Yes. Vale first. Yes." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the baby. "Okay," he said. Elena looked at him. He looked back at her, and his face was the face she had fallen in love with. Not the composed professional face, not the dangerous face, not the face that managed rooms. Just his face, the one from under all the architecture. The one from East Camden that had never fully gone away, no matter how many towers he built over it. "I'm going to spend a long time making this right," he said. "I know I can't make it right, but I'm going to spend a long time trying." She looked at him. She thought about the night in Las Vegas, the whole long, burning architecture of it. The storm, the phone calls, the elevator, the corridor, the warehouse in Providence, the plane, the round table in her father's study. She thought about everything it had cost to arrive in this room, in this afternoon light, with this specific weight in her arms. "I know," she said. And she did know. That was the thing. She knew it the way she knew the worn brass of her father's door handle, and the smell of osobuco and the precise temperature of the elevator button under her fingertip at 11 o'clock on a stormy Las Vegas night. She knew it in the way that knowledge becomes bodily. Not belief, not hope, just the solid, unremarkable fact of it. He was going to try. She was going to let him.
Aurora slept between them in the quiet room, and the afternoon light moved across the floor, the way light moves when you're not trying to catch it, slowly, in the direction it was always going, without asking permission from anyone. Outside, New York continued in its permanent and indifferent and somehow comforting noise. Below on the street, people moved with the purposeful anonymity of people who have somewhere to be. The world went about its work. Elena held her daughter, and she did not look out the window, and she did not look back. She looked at what was in front of her, and for the first time in a very long time, that was enough.